These are the best decks for each EX card in Pokemon TCG Pocket upon release. Of course, things will change with the game. There will be other variations that you can build, and the meta is always shifting, but you're going to walk away from this video with a great deck for each EX Pokemon and a few variations that you can build as well. Given that our stars of Genetic Apex are Charizard, Mewtwo, Pikachu, why don't we start there? Let's start with talking about Charizard EX. Charizard EX is a very powerful card. It has 2 attacks, Slash and Crimson Storm. The real highlight of this, of course, is Crimson Storm, being able to do 200 damage with a single attack that can KO any Pokemon in the entire game. The tough part is powering this card up, and then of course, you lose 2 energy when you use Crimson Storm. So let's talk about how you would build a Charizard deck. The deck we're taking a look at here is the full Charizard line: Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard EX, and of course 2 Moltres EX. Moltres EX has some decks that it can build as well, but the big thing with this is getting your Moltres out early, using Inferno Dance to power up Charizard, then getting Charizard in there so that you can start sweeping the enemy team. There aren't a ton of amazing ways to build Charizard if you don't have Moltres EX. You could build it with some cheap cards like Rapidash or Heatmore or something like that. You could also build it with some type of wall to give you time to power up your Charizard, but in general, Char just needs so much fire energy to do its job. There aren't too many variations on Char in the current meta. The rest of your deck is going to be built up with trainer cards, a couple of potions, X-Speeds, Pokeballs, Professor's Research, Sabrina's, 1 Giovanni, and a red card. There are a few variations that you could throw around with this as well. You could pull in some trainer cards that you particularly like, but the idea with this deck is getting Moltres out there early and powering up Char. Now that we've talked about Charizard, let's talk about Mewtwo EX. Mewtwo EX is kind of similar to Char. It's a basic, so you don't have the multiple stages that you need to find. It does 50 damage with 2 energy, 150 with 4, discarding 2 psychic energy on this Pokemon when you use Side Drive. Really powerful card, especially because it's a basic. It only takes 2 turns to start doing a ton of damage. This card is often paired with the card we're going to talk about next, and that is Gardevoir. Gardevoir is really amazing. You get this card on your bench and you use it to power up Mewtwo. You're essentially giving Mewtwo 2 psychic energy every turn with the passive energy that you create, and then the ability Psy Shadow from Gardevoir, allowing you to add more energy onto the Pokemon in your active spot. It's just incredibly powerful. You see it do very well in tournaments for this reason. There are a few different ways to build it, but what we have right here is a real basic look at it. 2 routes, 2 Kirlia, 2 Gardevoir, and then 2 Mewtwo EXs. The rest filled up with trainer cards, a very similar trainer card setup that we just saw with Charizard. Some potions, some X-Speeds, Pokeballs, red card, Professor's Research, Giovanni, and Sabrina. Again, you can tool these around a little bit to your liking. You also could throw in one more basic Pokemon if you'd like, but the nice thing about having less basic Pokemon in a deck like this is when you play something like Pokeball, the chance for you to get one of the Pokemon that you really want is incredibly high. The strategy's simple: get Mewtwo out there, power up Gardevoir on your bench, sweep the enemy team. Now let's talk about the game's mascot, Pikachu EX. Pikachu EX is a cool one. It is also a basic, right? And it only takes 2 energy to start doing damage. Now, unlike Mewtwo, it's only going to do 30 damage for that first attack, but it does 30 damage for each of your benched lightning type Pokemon. And this is where the strategy with Pikachu EX comes in. So if we take a look at our deck right here, we have a couple of Voltorbs, couple of Electrodes, and a couple of Zapdos EXs. You also could throw in more electric types. People play this with Zebstrika. I've seen people play this with Pincurchin. The idea is simple: Pikachu EX in the active spot, a full bench of lightning type Pokemon, and then start doing crazy damage to the enemies. The nice thing about things like Zapdos are huge HP pools, and they don't take a lot of energy to start doing damage. Same thing with Voltorb, pretty good HP pool. When you get to Electrode, it has 80. It takes 2 electric energy, or lightning energy I should say, to deal damage, and and has no retreat cost. One of the best things in general about lightning type is they have almost no retreat cost across the board. Just so many good cards that take very little to retreat. Let's take a look at our items right here. Couple of potions, couple of X speeds in case you need to pull something to the bench but still want it to be able to attack later. Couple of Pokeballs, Professor's Research, Giovanni's, and Sabrina. I like running multiple Giovanni's in this deck because sometimes the damage can feel a little underwhelming, and just getting that extra pop can pick up KOs that your opponent wouldn't expect. Again, if you'd like to run less trainer cards, you could throw in the entire Blitzel Zebstrika line. That way you'd have more basics and just an easier way to fill your bench. I think that works great too. There also is a variation of this deck with Lieutenant Surge, but usually when I'm playing Pikachu EX, I don't run Lieutenant Surge. I run Lieutenant Surge in a very similar deck, but then I'm running a basic Pikachu, non-EX Pikachu I should say, and a Raichu so I can power that up. Our next EX Pokemon we're going to talk about is Marowak EX. Marowak is extremely powerful sometimes, and it's a really fun card to play. It's only a stage 1. It requires 2 energy with the opportunity to do 160 damage. Very, very powerful, and that KOs a lot of the EX roster. It also has the ability to do 0 damage, so you're rolling the dice, or flipping the coins, I guess as you should say, when you're playing Marowak EX. But a lot of advantages, right? It's really easy to power this thing up, and with a little luck, or even average luck, just getting 80 every time you attack, you could take out the enemy team pretty easily. Now let's talk about a couple cool ways to build it. You actually can pair Marowak with a lot of things because Marowak has, again, a low energy cost. You can have Marowak look like the star of the deck, pairing it with something like Diglett Dugtrio right here. The thing I like about using Dugtrio is it's 1 energy cost with 1 energy retreat cost, and it's just annoying. You flip a coin. If it's heads on your opponent's next turn, it prevents all damage and effects done to this Pokemon, which is really cool. They would have to Sabrina you essentially to, you know, get this effect off. The only downside to Dugtrio is the damage is a little low and its HP is a little low. Another option is playing something like Sandslash in its place. Sandslash is nice. It requires 2 energy, but at the same time, Marowak only requires 2, so I wouldn't stress too much about it. You can get Sandslash in there and you can do damage, 70 damage for every slash you do at a cost of 2 energy. A basic look at how you could build this: you could run the Dugtrio line, the Marowak line, and leave it right there. This leaves your deck to be pretty full of trainers though. It's not necessarily awful, but you're really risking a lot to get these cards. So I would say it would be a little better if you would fill out your deck with more basic Pokemon. Even adding something like a non-EX Marowak into your deck and then a couple of Farfetch'd could really go a long way. You also, of course, could put in other fighting type Pokemon that you like. You could throw Primeape in a deck like this. There are just a lot of great options for it, and I think lately, as I've been playing, I have enjoyed having more aggressive early basic Pokemon in my deck, like Farfetch'd. That way, it's not so devastating when you don't pull the exact cards that you want. So a deck like this could have a couple of Digletts into Dugtrio, or Sandshrew into Sandslash, some Cubone, some Marowaks. We've got a couple of Farfetch'd, then we fill out the deck with a Potion, X Speed, couple of Pokeballs, couple of Professor's Research, couple of Giovanni's, couple of Sabrinas. Really strong, really mean. And Marowak, again, can be paired with other cards. You could easily pair this with other fighting decks. I've used it in Machamp decks and things like that. Marowak is just great for a low energy cost, but then sometimes, you know, not so great. All right, Machamp EX. Machamp EX is a pretty interesting one, and I think the most interesting thing about Machamp EX is that it evolves, and every turn that this card is out, if you put 1 energy on it, you are dealing damage. At its stage 2 evolution as an EX Pokemon, it's going to do 120 damage with a single attack and have 180 HP. Pretty bulky, which is nice, and with Giovanni especially, this comes right in line with KOing some enemy EX Pokemon in some pretty fun ways. Alone, this will KO Pikachu EX in 1 hit, and with a Giovanni, you'll also KO Starmie EX and Zapdos EX. It's a little shy of some of the other cards in the deck, but those would be 2 big hits. Again, the nice thing is, if we look at Machop, first round it's out, you're dealing damage, you're dealing 20. If you look at Machoke, second round it's out, you're dealing 50, and then into Machamp. I think the only drawback to a Machamp deck is it feels a little basic, but that's not always bad. A lot of decks like to ramp up in big ways, and this deck really gets in the enemy's face and makes sure that they cannot evolve fast enough to mitigate the amount of crazy damage that you're doing. Then you get to sort of Sabrina them, bring in some cards that they really don't want to have out there, and start KOing them. One setup we have right here is a Machamp Mankey deck. I've also played this with a lot of the other fighting variations, you know, things like Dugtrio, things like Sandslash, some normal type Pokemon as well that seem to work pretty decently. The cool thing about Mankey into Primeape is a stage 1 card, and if it has any damage on it, it does 100 damage per hit, which is pretty cool. It all depends on what you're seeing on the other side and if they're able to start sweeping Primeape in a single hit. If they're not, and they put any damage onto Mankey, this could actually be a really annoying card for your opponents to deal with. I also do have to say there is a promo Mankey card that will be coming out when the game goes global at some point, and that card does damage to itself as Mankey. I would love to have that in this deck because that would just be such an annoying thing for your opponents to deal with if you didn't start with Machop on the board. In this deck, you have an option of throwing in a couple of basic Pokemon like a Farfetch'd would work pretty well. You also can just pull these and have more trainer cards. The rest of your deck filled out with X-Speeds, Pokeballs, Professor's Research. I would love to keep one Giovanni in there, especially for running into some of those EX Pokemon, and a few Sabrinas. There is also a version of this deck where you're running Kabutops. I've not played around with it enough to give you kind of a full opinion on it, but it's Kabuto, Kabutops, and Dome Fossils. You would obviously be able to put these out as well for a very low energy cost, right? Kabutops is an interesting card because it takes 1 energy to do 50 damage, and it will heal you while it's happening, but it does take a while to get this thing online, right? You need a Fossil, then you need Kabuto, then you need Kabutops. The cool thing about it is you don't spend much energy for it, so you can spend the rest of your time powering up your Machamp. Now let's talk about Arcanine EX. I have to be honest, this is one of the more underwhelming EX cards in my opinion. It's not that it doesn't do decent damage, it does 120 damage, has some decent HP. It's a stage 1, which is pretty cool, right? You don't need to get a lot to get this thing going from an evolutionary standpoint, but it does feel like it's just a little underpowered. Also, Fire has this annoying problem of running into so many water types because water is very popular in the meta. Thanks, Misty. But I do think there are some ways that you could build this thing. I want to give a shout out to Bella VGC for helping me with this and a few of the decks here in this video, but this one specifically, I have not played enough Arcanine Blaine, but there's a cool option here. So what you're doing is you're running Growlites and Arcanines, Ponytas and Rapidashes. That way, if you do get the Ponyta or Rapidash going, it only requires 1 fire energy, and you can pair this with Blaine to do a lot of surprising damage while you power up your Arcanine. So that deck looks like 2 potions, 2 X-Speeds, 2 Pokeballs, 2 Blaines, 2 Professor's Research, 1 Sabrina, 1 Giovanni on top of the lines that we're looking at right now. I think there's another option when running Arcanine, which is having the Arcanine EX line as well as Moltres EX to power it up. I just think this feels like a slightly underwhelming version of maybe Centiskorch or Charizard. We'll talk about Centiskorch a little later. With this deck, I also have a couple of Heatmores in there. Potions, X-Speeds, Pokeballs, Professor's Research, Sabrina, Giovanni. You could swap out those Heatmores for something like Magmar. However, the more Pokemon you put in, the harder and harder it is to find and get everything you need for Arcanine EX. So this deck is highlighting Moltres EX as sort of the EX Pokemon of the hour. This is not powering up a Charizard, but of course, with how Moltres works, this is powering up something, right? Inferno Dance is, I think, the big selling point of Moltres. You put 1 energy on it, you will flip 3 coins, and you'll start to power up your bench. Of course, you could put 3 energy and start doing Heat Blast, but a lot of the time Moltres is not out long enough for that to happen because you have something powered up on the bench that's ready to come in and sweep. We're going to talk about Centiskorch here. The nice thing about this, compared to something like Charizard EX, is this is a 1 prize card, right? Charizard is 2. Also, this only discards 1 fire energy, so once you get 4 on it right away, you don't have to worry about not being able to attack in another round. You can just keep putting 1 energy on it once it's in your active spot. I don't really love Moltres EX, Centiskorch. In fact, I think unfortunately a lot of the fire options don't feel as good outside of like Blaine and stuff like that, which is not what we're going to be talking about too much in this video, because this video is about all of the EX choices. But this is a cool deck to build if you're kind of focusing on Moltres not powering up Char. Couple of Sizzlopedes, couple of Centiskorches, couple of Moltres, and then a ton of trainers fill out this deck. If you feel like this deck is a little too trainer heavy, you could have some other strong fire Pokemon take some of these spots, you know, drop a Pokédex, drop a red card or something like that, and then start to put in some powerful basic fire Pokemon. One thing you could do is eliminate a ton of trainers and kind of put in an entire Charizard line, but not Charizard EX. It still takes a lot of energy, and it's kind of similar to Centiskorch, but the only disadvantage here is you have to get to a stage 2 Pokemon. In general, I think it's usually simple to kind of keep it simple with Moltres and Centiskorch. Let's talk about one of the powerful starter Pokemon here in the game, and that is Venusaur EX, our Kanto starter. Venusaur EX is actually really cool. At first, I kind of didn't love powering up Venusaur. In fact, in general, I kind of like just faster, more aggressive decks, but Venusaur has some really cool stuff going on. So it's 190 HP, which is massive. It has 2 attacks, Razor Leaf for 3 energy, Giant Bloom for 4. Obviously, this is what you're looking for. You're able to do 100 damage and heal yourself for 30. A lot of the idea in a Venusaur deck seems to be having these tanky Pokemon that are out there that are really difficult for the enemy to take down. So the first deck that we're going to look at is a Venusaur Lilligant deck. The way this works is you're going to want to get this Lilligant out there in your active spot with 2 grass energy on it. Every time you're attacking here with Leaf Supply, you're going to be powering up your bench. If you can get that Bulbasaur under your bench, you'll start powering it up so that while you're attacking with Lilligant, putting pressure on your opponents, you are going to be powering up Venusaur, so when it does finally come in, it's ready to go. I think this is quite strong. The deck we have right here is a couple of Petalils, a couple of Lilligants, the entire Venusaur line, 2 Bulbas, 2 Ivies, 2 Venusaur EXs. I've also got a Farfetch'd in there just to have another basic Pokemon. The only thing that can be a little frustrating about this deck is pulling Bulbasaur early, because you really don't want it in your active spot. And if that's the only basic you pull, that would be unfortunate. Fill out the rest of the deck, couple of potions, Pokeballs, Professor's Research, Sabrina, and Erica. So you could switch these around a little bit. Of course, there's, you know, an option to not run Potion and run some other trainers that are strong. Erica, however, is great for this deck. It is a potion that's way, way better. You heal 50 damage to one of your grass type Pokemon. Can be used for either your Venusaur or, of course, your Lilligant to just keep it healthy in battle. Really, really strong combination right here. Another option for Venusaur is to pair Venusaur with Exeggutor, and I want to show off a deck that recently won a Pokemon Pocket tournament with Venusaur Exeggutor. So it's 2 Bulbasaurs, 2 Ivysaurs, 2 Venusaurs, couple of Exeggutors, a couple of Exeggutors, not just Exeggutor EX, and 1 Exeggutor EX. This gives you the option to put out Exeggutor and just start to annoy your opponents while you power up Venusaur on the bench, or you could use the EX version as well. Exeggutor EX is very powerful. This is kind of like a deck for Exeggutor EX also, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. 2 X speeds, 2 Pokeballs, 2 Professor's Research, 2 Erica, 1 Sabrina. Really cool deck. And again, it won a pretty big Pokemon Pocket TCG tournament. And I want to show one more Venusaur variant right here. This is the Venusaur line and 2 Caterpies, and then filling out the rest of your deck with trainer cards. The nice thing about having Caterpie, obviously, is you're able to start pulling in all of the grass types you need. So it's really easy to get Venusaur from your deck. And sometimes when you're playing, just the heart of the cards is not with you. You could really use something to help you draw a ton of your Pokemon. So now let's talk about Exeggutor. We showed it in that Venusaur deck right there. There are a few cool ways to build it. The nice thing about this is it's 1 grass energy to do a ton of annoying damage. So there are a lot of good grass decks that you can slot this into and do a ton of damage. You also can pair this with other really powerful normal type cards to give them a great wall while you power them up. So let's talk about Executor. 160 HP, 40 damage on a single energy, but it could be 80. So you're always doing damage. You're always putting pressure on. You cost 1 energy, and sometimes you're actually doing a big chunk. You're doing 80 damage, which is why this card is just so good. It can be used in so many decks that want to pair something with grass energy. You can go full grass. You also could pair this again with a lot of normal type Pokemon to get some really cool effects. I want to take a look at a deck here called Belle of the Ball. I saw this deck, I believe, because it was played in a tournament. It's made by, I hope I'm getting the name right, Hat Ido. So the idea behind this is a couple of Bell Sprouts, a couple of Weepin' Bells, a couple of Victor Bells, as well as the Executor line with an additional regular Executor and, of course, 2 Executor EXs. So the cool thing about Victor Bell, if you want to take a look at that card with me here for a sec, is not only does it deal decent damage with just 2 energy, it also has this ability. If this Pokemon is in the active spot, once in your turn, you can switch one of your opponent's benched basic Pokemon to the active spot. So you could put a lot of pressure on early with Executor, and then you could start bringing in some of the weaker Pokemon on the bench with Victor Bell. It's a very, very fun strategy. The rest of the deck, couple of X speeds, couple of Pokeballs, Professor's Research, Erika's, of course, because these grass type Pokemon just get huge heals, and a Sabrina. This is, again, a fun way to play Executor EX. I actually think it's probably better paired with Venusaur for my money, but you could do a lot of cool things. Again, there are a lot of great grass type options. Something else you could run is a couple of Pincers in this deck, and then just fill out the rest of your deck with even more trainer cards, couple of potions, X speeds, etc., etc. You could also put in, again, more normal types. So if you just want some early pressure, you can put in things like Farfetch. You can put in things like Meowth if you're really looking to draw, but I don't think you need to have something like Meowth. Everything that you're going to pull with a deck like this is going to be pretty powerful. Moving on to Zapdos EX. The interesting thing about Zapdos, in fact, all of the elemental birds are they are EX cards and they're great cards, but they also feel sort of like complementary to a lot of the decks that you see in the game. So I don't think you need to build a ton of decks specifically around Zapdos, Moltres, Articuno. However, there are decks that you can build around these Pokemon. So let's talk about a few of them here with Zapdos. And for the sake of this, I'm going to kind of not include Zapdos EX and Pikachu EX. That's a deck we already talked about with Pikachu, and it's extremely good. Zapdos costs 1 energy to do damage with Peck, 3 to do possibly 200 damage with Thundering Hurricane. Of course, this can do all the way from 0 to 200 damage, right? It has a 1 retreat cost. This is one of my favorite things about all of the lightning type cards, like low retreat costs across the board, attacks usually for very little energy, which I think is great. Of course, it's EX, so it costs for 2. I'm going to show you a deck right now that I don't like, and I'll tell you why here in a sec. This is an 18 trainers Zapdos deck. It's 2 Zapdos, potions, X speeds, Pokeballs, hand scopes, Pokedex, red cards, Professor's Research, Giovanni's, and Sabrina's. The whole concept behind this deck is to get Zapdos out, guaranteed, obviously, it's a basic Pokemon, and then just start attacking with it and powering it up with all of your silly trainer cards behind you. This deck does not work as well as the Articuno 18 trainer. The reason Articuno 18 trainer works better and is really, really cheesy is because of Misty. However, this is a deck that you could play. I would recommend not playing it, but I had to show it to you because it is a possible deck. There is also a version of this deck where you pull out 2 trainers and you put in 2 Pikachu EXs. I would say that deck is probably better. I also don't love that deck. So I'm just putting it out there that this deck exists. I personally don't like this playstyle. I think it's like like you kind of broke the game a little bit, and even then I don't even like it. I don't think it wins that much. Articuno does much better, again, because of Misty. Now let's talk about some actual decks. This deck right here is the Blitzel Zebstrika line into Zapdos EX. I like this deck. The interesting thing about it is it has a low amount of basic cards, right? You only have 4 basic Pokemon to put out there, but at the same time, all of these Pokemon attack for 1 energy. So the first round you get any of these cards, you're able to attack. I don't love decks that have such a low amount of Pokemon in them sometimes, so I've actually been playing a variation of this with Eevee and Jolteon that I really loved. Let me show it to you. So this deck looks a little different, right? We have Blitzel into Zebstrika, we have Jolteon, and of course we have 2 Eevees to get to Jolteon. The thing I like a lot about this deck is, again, all of your cards are able to attack the turn you put them out, right? Even Zebstrika just costs 1 energy, Zapdos costs 1 energy, Jolteon costs 2, but it takes 2 turns to get Jolteon out. This is a very, very fun deck and a real fun variation for Zapdos EX. Again, it feels like Zapdos EX is probably best paired with Pikachu EX, but you can slot it into just about any Lightning deck and have great results. All right, let's take a look at Articuno EX right here. Articuno EX is a very good card because it pairs really well with another. I actually think this wouldn't be so hot if it wasn't for another card that we'll talk about here in a sec. Articuno EX costs 2 energy to do 40 damage with Ice Wing, 3 water energy to do 80 damage with Blizzard, but it also damages your opponent's bench, 140 HP, a decent card, right? The real reason this is so good, not only because it's a high HP basic card, right? It can tank a pretty decent amount of damage, but also because of this. We're going to take a look at this card right here. Misty. Choose one of your water Pokemon, flip a coin until you get tails for heads. Take a water energy from your energy zone and attach it to that Pokemon. So in one turn, in fact, in the first turn in the game, you can power this card up and win the game in 1 round. It is the only combination in the game that has that setup. I guess you could kind of do it with Lapras as well, right? But in general, the Articuno 18 trainer deck is a thing. That looks like this. 2 Articunos and then 18 trainer cards. What this does is guarantees that you get Articuno in your hand, because you have to get a basic card in your hand. There are no mulligans in this game. And then it also guarantees that the time you throw a Pokeball, another Articuno appears on your bench. You use this alongside a Misty as soon as you get it to power up Articuno as quickly as you can and start sweeping your opponents. Do I like this deck? Does it sound like I like this deck? I think it's super cheesy and dumb. You will see some people playing it. The funniest thing in this deck is when you play against it and you beat it, nothing feels better than taking down the cheesiest deck in Pokemon TCG Pocket. I would not recommend this. Outside of this, I think there are some cool ways to build Articuno, and Articuno works in a ton of different water decks. What you're looking at right here is a hybrid of Articuno EX and Starmie EX. We'll talk about Starmie here in just a minute. Starmie EX is one of my favorite cards in the game. This has 2 Articunos, 2 Staryus into 2 Starmies, as well as 2 Psyducks into 2 Golducks. A lot of great basic cards, a lot of cards that attack on a great curve, right? You go Staryu into Starmie, it goes from 1 water to 2. You go from Psyduck into Golduck, 1 water or 1 colorless into 2. And then of course you have Articuno, this big tanky Pokemon that you're able to put out there and power up your bench, but you don't even need that much time to power up your bench. The rest of it's set up with Sabrinas, Giovanni's, Misty's, Professor Research, and Pokeballs. You can of course switch things around here. You could throw in X speeds if you like to have a lower retreat cost. The nice thing about this deck is the retreat cost is already low. Starmie EX has a 0 retreat cost, and almost everything else is a 1 outside of Articuno. So you're pretty much set up from that perspective. You also could run Potion here that could give you some more survivability, but I like Giovanni with this a little bit. You get a surprising amount of damage from some of these cards, and that little extra bump can make it really, really powerful. A great deck, and again, you could look at this as an Articuno deck, or maybe even more of a Starmie EX deck. We'll talk about Starmie here in a minute. Let's talk about another way to build Articuno without Starmie. So this is a pretty fun Articuno deck here. It's Articuno Greninja. If you haven't taken a look at Greninja yet, super fun card, essentially able to attack every turn from the bench and do 20 damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon, which I think is really cool. It also costs only 2 energy to do some damage with Mist Slash. That being said, most of the time you have your Greninja on the bench. Your Articuno is that front line. I also have Lapras in this deck just for another basic Pokemon. Sometimes with decks where you only have a limited amount of basics, you pull kind of the wrong one at the start of the game and you're annoyed that it's out there. So this is 2 Froakies, Frogadiers, Greninjas, 1 Lapras, couple of Articunos. We've got Pokeballs, a red card, Professor's Research, Misty, Giovanni, and Sabrina right here. So you also could swap in some potions here, specifically for Lapras and Articuno, just so you're able to have that strong wall out there for a little while longer while you are looking to evolve your Greninja. Now, there are actually a lot of cool water Pokemon that you could slot in here, though. I've only shown you a couple. You could run Articuno with Amistar. You could run Articuno with Dragonite. You could run Articuno with Frostmoth. You could set up a lot of different situations with Articuno, and I really do think that the legendary birds feel like cards that can slot into a lot of decks of that type. Okay, let's talk about Starmie EX, one of my absolute favorite EX cards, maybe my favorite EX card of the game. The only thing I don't like about it is I feel like it's too good. So, Starmie EX, its downside is it only has 130 HP, so there are a lot of good Pokemon that could actually take this thing out in one hit. It costs 2 water energy to do 90 damage with Hydro Splash, so you attack on turn 1 with Staryu, you attack on turn 2 with Starmie EX. Crazy, crazy good damage. It also has a 0 retreat cost. So this thing is just such a beautiful card. So also it is a really pretty card here. Also slots so well into a billion different water decks. The thing that's tough about giving you the best Starmie EX deck is it really just depends on what other water cards you want to play. So let's say you had Starmie EX and you just had a variety of kind of your trainers. A potion, you might not run XP just because the retreat cost is so low. A couple of Pokeballs, a couple of Professor's Research, Misties, a Giovanni, Sabrina, and then you've got a lot of openings to put in some other cards here. Let's talk about what else you could throw in. Just looking through your water cards, you could run Starmie Blastoise. If you want, you could have Starmie out there early while you power up Blastoise. You could run Starmie Psyduck Golduck, something like this right here, with adding more trainer cards or even a couple of basic Pokemon like Farfetch'd. You could have a setup like this. Starmie and Golduck, Psyduck, they're all extremely aggressive early on, right? So you're able to do a ton of damage fast, just become really aggressive, not letting your opponents set up. You could, of course, play things like Tentacruel. You could play things like Greninja, which is a really cool line with this. You could play Ammonite, Amistar with this. You could get Articuno EX in there. So you could take 2 Articuno EXs. You could take the entire like line of let's say you didn't want to do the line here of Golduck, you could have Tentacruel line right in there. Perfect, really easy setup. It's just super strong Pokemon that attack really fast and let you build kind of anything water you want. There are so many cool options with this. We were just talking about Greninja a moment ago. Get the whole Greninja line in there. You have Starmie doing damage early while you're powering up Greninja on the bench. A really great combination, Starmie Greninja. Here's a fun deck right here. I don't see too many Gyarados decks being made, but a good way to power up Gyarados, Starmie, Staryu. They're dealing all the damage, and then you're powering up that Magikarp into Gyarados on the bench, hoping to maybe get a little lucky with Misty. The nice thing about Starmie is you don't need to worry about getting lucky with Misty, right? And then you can power up Gyarados. Again, Starmie is just one of those cards that slots into so many water decks that I think you really can't go wrong. Starmie, Articuno, Greninja, Starmie, Magikarp, Gyarados, Starmie, Frostmoth, Blastoise. You could run so many different combinations with Starmie, and I think it is one of the best cards in the game for that reason. Now let's talk about Wigglytuff EX, one of the trickier ones to put into decks because I feel like there's so many decks you could put it into given that it's a colorless card, and that's the real advantage of this card in my opinion. So Wigglytuff, 140 HP. It costs 3 colorless energy to deal damage with this, which is probably the toughest part about it. Also, we should talk a little bit about Jigglypuff. The current version of Jigglypuff costs 2 colorless energy to deal damage, a low amount of damage at that. It's kind of unfortunate. There is a promo Jigglypuff card that I think would be much better, where it's not doing any damage, but you are able to sing your opponents to sleep with 1 energy. All that being said, we don't have it in the game yet. It should be here when the game globally launches, at least very soon after. Back to Wiggly. The cool thing about this is it's guaranteed sleep on the opposing Pokemon. It's only 80 damage and it does cost a lot of energy, but there are some cool decks you can make with it. I think a really simple deck that you could look at is a Koga Stall deck with Wiggly. And I think it would be good to just show Koga Stall in this video too. So what Koga does, let's talk about Koga real quick. Koga is a great trainer card. You take a Muck or Weezing in the active spot and you put it back into your hand. Not only the Muck or Weezing, but also the Coughing and Grimer that would be under them, right? Weezing, great card. It requires 1 energy to deal damage with Tackle, and it has the ability Gas Leak to poison the opponent's Pokemon in that active spot if this is in the active spot. So you get Weezing in the active spot, you only need 1 energy on it, you can do damage every turn with Tackle, you can poison every Pokemon that your opponent brings in, while at the same time you are powering up your bench with Wigglytuff. The way I have this deck set up is a couple of Coughings into Weezing, a couple of Jigglypuffs into Wiggly, a Farfetch'd in there just in case you pull, I would rather pull Farfetch'd, right, than pulling Jigglypuff or something like that, a Potion, a few X-Speeds, a few Pokeballs, Professor's Research, Kogas for sure, and Sabrina's. If you don't like having Farfetch'd in here, you could swap that out, put a Giovanni or something like that in your deck. I've lately enjoyed having more basic Pokemon. Sometimes if you only have a couple, just like you pull the wrong one, you don't see another one for a bit, and you kind of brick and lose, which I don't love. There are other ways to build Wiggly though, tons of other ways, again, because Wiggly is colorless. So this version of the Wiggly deck right here has Drowsy into Hypno, which is also very annoying. Whoops, I accidentally took out Hypno. No, my sweet, sweet Hypno, come back, buddy. Where are you? Where are you? There you are. So let's talk about Hypno here really quick. This also requires 3 energy, which is the tricky part about a deck like this. Like 2 kind of high cost cards, but they're both stage 1, which is really nice. This card, once during your turn with their ability Sleep Pendulum, if you flip heads, the opponent is now asleep. This is just a super annoying deck. I mean, you can do the same thing kind of with Frostmoth if you wanted, but you also, of course, can pair Wiggly really with anything. You could have a Wiggly and water deck that you could start building your water Pokemon up. You could have Wiggly and a dark deck, Wiggly and a fire deck. There are so many options for Wiggly, but I wanted to give you a couple here. So this is Hypno Wiggly. You get Drowsy into Hypno, Jiggly into Wiggly, a couple potions, X-Speeds, Pokeballs, a red card in there, Professor's Research, a Giovanni, and a couple of Sabrinas. Pretty mean, right? Something like this is just crazy amounts of sleep. Again, there are other ways to do crazy amounts of sleep in the game as well. Let's also look at Wigglytuff being paired with Executor. You could have a couple of Executes, a regular Executor, a couple of Executor EXs, and then Jigglypuff into Wiggly. The amazing thing about Executor, of course, we talked about it earlier, 1 cost, right? It is a 1 cost grass energy, so you can power this up super easy and then spend the rest of your time getting Wigglytuff powered up. The only disadvantage to this strategy is the high, super high retreat cost of your cards right here. We dropped our red card. We've got Potions, X-Speeds, Pokeballs, Professor's Research, Giovanni, Sabrina. Also, if you wanted to, you could drop a Potion and put in an Erica and plan on healing just the grass types with it. So there's that as an option as well. Now on to Gengar EX. Gengar EX has such a cool ability. When this Pokemon's in the active spot, your opponent can't use supporters. It's really, really powerful, and depending on when you get it in, you can really cripple them, right? They can't Sabrina you, they can't Blaine you if they're playing a Blaine deck, they couldn't Misty and power something up. Really, really strong card. The disadvantage for Gengar, also great HP. The disadvantage, it's a stage 2, so it takes a little while and it takes 3 psychic energy. There are a few ways to build this. I've seen people building Gengar with Gardevoir, so you can power it up pretty easily, but then you've got 2 stage 2s. That can be a little tough. I've also seen people playing it a little bit like this. So you've got Gengar and you've got like kind of a Hypno combination that we were looking at before, Drowsy into Hypno. The unfortunate thing about this is just high energy cost across the board. I think Gengar is really cool. Its only disadvantage being an EX Pokemon is the high amount of energy it takes to get it online. The way this deck looks right here, Ghastly, Haunter, Gengar line, Drowsy, Hypno. Now, something else that you can do here, if you don't want to only have these as options, you can put in something like Mewtwo EX or even Mewtwo. So let's say we dropped something like one of our X speeds right here. Maybe we dropped one of our Giovannis and we were able to throw in a Mewtwo EX, or again, even just a regular Mewtwo into this deck would be pretty powerful. So the nice things that you get with this is you get a big tank that you can use. Mewtwo EX obviously only costs 2 energy to start dealing some damage, so there's an option there. Mewtwo, on the other hand, let's say you wanted to go with that route, you could put this in, and it's not as likely that you're going to be powering it up, but it's a big basic tank for your deck. However, if you are able to get it powered up, it does a huge amount of damage, and it's only a 1 cost, being regular Mewtwo instead of Mewtwo EX. But let's say for simplicity, you just want one. You're going to put in Mewtwo EX here, a couple of Gengars, Hypnos, Haunters, Drowsies, Ghastlys, Potion, X-Speed, Pokeballs, Professor's Research, 1 Giovanni, 2 Sabrinas. So ideally, Mewtwo or the Hypno line would power up in front of your opponents, and then hopefully you could get Gengar in there after that. The other nice thing about Gengar is Ghastly costs 1 energy, Haunter costs 1 energy to deal damage, and then Gengar costs 3. So it does attack on a decent curve if you're powering it up every single turn. Finally, let's take a look at Blastoise EX, my all-time favorite Pokemon being Squirtle. I've wanted to make some fun Blastoise decks work. I do think Blastoise unfortunately takes a lot to power it up, and then once it does get powered up, it's a slow one. It's a slow one outside of Misty, which is, you know, very interesting for a lot of water decks. I think there's some great options for water decks, especially because of what Misty can do. But let's talk about Blastoise. 180 HP, which is great. Surf dealing damage at 2 energy, and Hydro Bazooka dealing damage at 3. Ideally, you get 5 energy on this thing, because if you do 160 damage, which is considerable. That will knock out most any Pokemon, not any Pokemon, but most any Pokemon in the game. Some of the drawbacks: 3 retreat cost, it is a stage 2, and it's weak to lightning, and you see a ton of lightning decks. I think one of the big issues with some of the water decks is just how often you'll run into Pikachu in this game. So let's take a look at this deck here. 2 Squirtles, 2 Wartortles, 2 Blastoise EXs, and 2 Articuno EXs. You use Articuno as that front line, and then you power up Blastoise in the back line. Potions, X-Speeds, Pokeballs, Professor's Research, definitely Misties, a Giovanni, and a Sabrina. You can move some of this around, pull an X-Speed, pull a Potion or something like that to add in another Sabrina or Giovanni if you prefer it. A lot of the time with this, you're hoping you get that Articuno early, and then you're filling out the rest of your deck. There are a lot of different variations that you can build on this, but with Blastoise needing so much energy to come online, ideally you would have something kind of cheap in that front line, right? A no-brainer option for this, of course, is Starmie EX. Starmie, amazing in that front line. You go 2 Staryus, 2 Starmies, drop a Potion, drop an X-Speed, and then all of a sudden you have this great front line. It doesn't require a lot of energy. It also deals some considerable damage. And the nice thing with a deck like this is, if one EX Pokemon goes down, but you're powering up another EX Pokemon, the 2 2-point loss from it isn't as bad. However, if they are able to take down a 1 cost, a Starmie or a Squirtle that was, a Staryu or a Squirtle that was out there in that active spot, now you're in trouble with EX Pokemon, right? That's kind of the advantage, disadvantage that you get. But if you get Starmie EX out there in that active spot, and then you're powering up Blastoise on the bench, you're looking pretty dang good. Again, this deck, Staryu into Starmie, Squirtle, Wartortle, Blastoise, a Potion, an X-Speed, couple of Pokeballs, Professor's Research, Misties for sure, Giovanni, and Sabrina. And since I haven't made a deck with this in this video, I wanted to highlight a really fun card, and that is Frostmoth. Frostmoth is 2 energy, one of them being water. You put your opponent's active Pokemon to sleep. It's a stage 1 coming from Snom. You could run a Snom Frostmoth Blastoise deck. That would be really, really fun. Sleep is so annoying. The unfortunate thing about this deck is, I think Blastoise, unlike some of the other EX Pokemon, I think Charizard hits harder. right? And Venusaur is just so incredibly tanky and can sometimes power up a little easier outside of Misty. So I think Blastoise lags behind a little bit, and having something in that active spot that's putting your opponents to sleep while you power it up could be really, really great. So there you have it, everybody. Some of the best decks in the game right now for all of the EX cards in Genetic Apex. Of course, things will change. More cards will come out, and I can't wait to make more videos about it. There are a lot of great decks that we didn't talk about because they're not EX based. I will make a video about some of those awesome meta decks here very soon. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I love you. I'll see y'all next time. We did it.